Afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here with you. I would have loved to have been in Dublin, obviously, but this really is going to be the next best thing, I hope. My name's Sharron Sturgess. I work in the Accessibility Centre at the University of Leicester. That's the university's disability service. And I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about some research that I did where I produced some good practice principles for supporting autistic students to work with their peers, whether that was group work within a teaching session or a group project outside of a teaching session. And I'm from Leicester in England, as I think you could probably tell from my accent. Oh, doesn't seem to want to let me. Oh, yeah, here we go. So the background to the project then. This was part of my master's. So I come from a disability services background. I was the manager of a disability service, and I got an interest in autism and became an autism practitioner. And as part of that, I decided to do my MA in autism education. And as part of my dissertation, I wanted to do a piece of research that would encourage academic departments to look at how they support their students. Because if you work with autistic learners, there's very often this emphasis on changing the autistic learner to fit in with the neurotypical population. And I would have academics who would come to me and say, can you teach them some social skills to fit in? And actually, that's not the way we need to see this. Autistic people don't need to change. I think we need to change. So I wanted to do something that would help departments to take responsibility for that. And then I thought, well, what area of autism learning would be good to look at? And the one that anecdotally I can say I got a lot of queries about was group work, because there's this perception that autistic people can't work with other people. They don't like working with other people. So I thought, well, that would be a useful one to look at. It was a master's dissertation, so obviously we were encouraged to keep it quite small scale. So I decided to focus on one department, the physics department, because they had some element of working with your peers on every single one of their modules on their undergraduate program, and they had the highest number of autistic students at that time. And I wanted a practical outcome. As a disabled person myself, I'm quite often asked to do research, and you can end up feeling a bit like a lab rat. And it's like, well, I'll answer this questionnaire or I'll do this interview, but what's the outcome going to be? And I didn't want to fall into that trap myself. I wanted the student voice to have useful input. And what I came up with was, I thought, well, can I develop some best practice principles? And actually, as I went through this, my driving force was really around universal design for learning, and the idea that these principles could benefit all learners, not just autistic learners, and that these are things that we could embed into all of our programs. So I started off on my literature review looking at reasons why autistic students might not enjoy working with other people. And the first three there are quite typical ones, really. The verbal and non-verbal communication issues, difficulties with social interaction, and issues with the development of a theory of mind, of understanding that other people have thoughts and ideas that might be different to your own. All of those would obviously could affect somebody when they're being asked to work with their peers. Rigidity of thought and behaviour is another key diagnostic criteria in autism. If you've got a very rigid way of working, if you've got a very rigid thought pattern, that can obviously influence how you are going to be able to work with other people. Issues with sensory processing. I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think the single biggest issue for most autistic people is the sensory environment and the overstimulation and the sensory environment that they're asked to work and learn in. And that would definitely, if you're asked to work with a number of people, where you're asked to work and how you're asked to work, there are going to be sensory issues around that. So that became quite a key feature of what I was trying to develop. Social anxiety and other mental health issues. We just had Frederick's great presentation there. Most autistic students will have some sort of mental health issue at some point. It's usually anxiety, social anxiety, catastrophizing, that sort of thing. And it can manifest in things like tics and stimming, rocking behaviors, tapping. Obviously, if you're being asked to work with a group of people, that can be very off-putting for you and for them. And I've seen students spend so much time trying to control their own behaviors that are related to their anxiety that they stop listening to what they're supposed to be doing. So that would be something else that would affect your ability to work with someone. Intolerance of uncertainty theory, I read a little bit about this. I'm no psychologist, so I won't pretend I understood it fully, but I think it's self-explanatory there that uncertainty, that difficulty with predicting outcomes would affect how you would work with other people. The uncertainty of what are their responses to you going to be, what are they going to want from you in return. And the special interests, you know, could lead them down one road to detriment of others if they can't, and that's related to rigidity of thought, really. So when I did all of these, I thought, well, it's all very deficit model, isn't it? This is how traditionally people think about autistic students. You know, they can't do this, they struggle with that, they have issues with this. But what I wanted was a very positive piece of research. So, however, many people with autism, they do enjoy working with other people and they actually make great team players. And too often, the reasonable adjustment for group work is to allow them to do it on their own. And I don't think that's very helpful at all. So I started to think, well, actually, I know a lot of my students like working with other people, and what might those reasons be? They do enjoy social interaction, especially when it has a context. So if I'm given a project to work on in my physics degree, I know that we've got to focus on this particular area. My anxieties about what we're going to discuss as a group will go down because it's context specific. And they like working with their friends. So again, that's an obvious thing when we're thinking about group work, is to think about how you set up those groups. Team roles help them to focus on the things that they're good at and the tasks that they like. Autistic people make excellent fact checkers, for example. They often have high expectations of themselves, and usually, and I've seen this with the students I work with, they make the rest of the group up their game because they're on them, and they like to stick to a deadline. Helps the autistic student to work on their own weaknesses as well as it would for any other student. You know, the fact that the autistic student you get at the age of 18 is not going to be the same one at the age of 21, same as their neurotypical peers. So, you know, group work, it helps them to grow and develop as learners. And not all people with autism are the same. Their skills develop over time. It's kind of a related point, really. And that they can learn new strategy to employ in social situations, which will hold them in good stead as they go into their working life. So with that in mind then, the research that I was going to do was conducted in 2 phases. So phase 1 was a review of some existing best practice guidance and an online questionnaire with students. And from that, I developed some draft principles, which in phase 2, I asked some students to review for me. I asked them to look at the draft principles, see if they agreed with them, have some further input. And then finally, I produced these draft principles, which were going to be ready to disseminate to the department. So in phase 1 then, the review of the existing best practice guidance, I've got a picture up there of some hard copies of them, but they were actually all available online. I reviewed 36 examples of best practice guidance from a number of organisations, including, these were all British-based organisations, so the Higher Education Academy, the National Association of Disability Practitioners, which is the English version of AHEAD, if you like, the National Autistic Society, the Institute of Physics, and a number of other universities, including Leeds, University College London, and London School of Economics. That guidance, some of it was disability specific, general guidance around supporting disabled people, and some of it was autism specific. I found some specific guidance on supporting students with group work generally, and the Institute of Physics have done some really good work on autism in physics, and I ended up with about 13,500 words of material around group work and supporting students with that. You see on the next slide, I've got a graph there. These were the themes that emerged from that thematic review, and the numbers that accompany it down the side show you how many of the 36 examples of best practice that I found the same theme in. I'm not going to go through them all, but the top one, as you can see there, is staff training for teaching staff. 23 examples of the guidance specifically mentioned that, specifically said that staff needed training in disability issues or in autism issues. A bit further down, there was a few that said that you should have training for all staff as well. And towards the bottom there, you'll see that some of the best practice guidance suggested that actually we should train students as well. If you're asking students to work with other students whose needs are different to their own, maybe there's some way we can incorporate student training to make group work run more smoothly. There's quite a few in there that to me seem fairly obvious. So timely preparation of your course materials and clear deadlines, a named member of staff that you can turn to for support, a welcoming atmosphere. And the second one at the top as well, the environmental considerations. That was outlined in an awful lot of the guidance that suggesting that, you know, those sensory issues, they're important for a large number of students, not just autistic students. So from that best practice review, I developed an online questionnaire, which was given out to the undergraduate physics students in the 2017-18 academic year. I did a pilot study with a PhD student who'd done the undergraduate programme, and she made, to make sure that the questions were understandable to the autistic students, she gave me a couple of suggestions of how I could word them better and pointed out some typos, which was very nice of her. The sampling frame was fairly small. There were 14 students across a 4-year undergraduate master's programme. 8 of them completed the questionnaire, and of those 8, a further 3 agreed to give me further feedback in phase 2, 1 through email and 2 of them through in-depth interviews. So what did the questionnaire tell me then? Well, 75% of the respondents said that they didn't need alternatives to group work, and they quite like it. It was an activity they enjoyed. 25% said, although they might enjoy it, they would probably need some sort of reasonable adjustment at some point. So it's only a quarter of the students felt that they needed the group work tasks changing to any large degree for them. I asked them about what types of group work were easy or more difficult to undertake. Workshops and a physics challenge module were quoted as being the easiest group work to undertake because they were more informal and you could work with the friends. And the physics challenge module was like a kind of team challenge where you got into a team with your friends, and the taught session you literally were given some physics problems and you had a physics face-off, as it was. So they liked that element of competition. When I came to what group work they found hardest, unanimously group labs were pointed out as the hardest group work to undertake. They're noisy, they're overwhelming, you don't get enough time to do what you need to do. The labs, there are too many students for the lab environment, so they were packed in as well. Labs, I think all but one student said that labs was the hardest for them to do. Things cited then which made working with other people easier. Well, they said having a clear structure and deadlines, being able to work with your friends and people you already knew, working with people who would do the work, understanding from their peers, and smaller group sizes. All of those things made group work easier. What made group work harder then? Working with people you have nothing in common with, working with people who don't want to be there or don't want to do the work they're supposed to do, people talking over each other, lack of clarity of the work that needs doing, and loud environments and groups. Now, I don't know about any of you, but if I flick back, you know, those things there would makes it easier when I'm asked to work alongside other people, when I'm pulled in on projects, you know, knowing what I'm supposed to be doing and by when helps. This, you know, these things, people talking over each other, people not pulling their weight, that makes group work harder. So it's quite obvious really that that was going to be an issue for the students. I also suggested some things to them about would this make group work easier. They had a Likert scale and they agreed or strongly disagreed. You can see from the graph there, I suggested 9 things. The bottom 2 there, unanimously, they said they agreed with that having an outline of what was covered in the group sessions and clear defined tasks and deadlines makes group work easier. The only one that there was any split on was the one about having others in the group know about my autism. Only half of the students said that they would want that. There was a bit more pushback against that. That wasn't something they necessarily thought would be helpful. The phase 2 student feedback. So I basically developed some draft principles and I did some student interviews, some in-depth interviews, and some things that they fed back to me was emphasizing what support exists. The physics department at my university are very, very good. They have an open door policy. but both of the students that took part in the in-depth interview said it wasn't always emphasised to them what they could do. You know, one assumed that open door meant literally open door. If my tutor's door's open, I can walk in. The other still said, well, I know they say open door, but what does that actually mean? Do I still have to interview and make an appointment? So we felt that making sure departments emphasised the support that they could have. Confirmation of the optimum group size. Both students agreed groups of no more than 4 or 5 were the most workable. And encouraging the use of social media. This was quite interesting that a lot of the students talked about how, although the university had some guidance on group work, and it was very much around making sure that you use the official university channels, such as a university email, they said that they always went off grid. There was always a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group chat, or there's another app that my kids use, you know, that have chat facilities, that was always used. And although they were encouraged not to use that, that's the way young people work. So something that I hadn't really thought much about was how we encourage our students to use social media. And then I think with what's happening to us all in the last month or so, we're all being forced to use online facilities in a way that we've never used them before. So again, I think as, you know, academic faculties, they need to think about how they can embed that within their programs. So this is the best practice guidance then. It's available online there. I took the feedback from the students and I came up with 10 principles of best practice, and they're available online. They're pretty much self-explanatory, but I will quickly go through them now because I'm conscious of time. So the first one was sharing information and reasonable adjustments, making sure you know who your students are and the things that they will need. The environment, I've already mentioned this afternoon around the sensory issues in autism. You need to think about what environment you're asking those students to work with, particularly if it's an in-class situation. Are you asking too many people to work in too smaller areas, so it will be too noisy and overwhelming? Group size and structure. So avoid random groupings and perhaps, you know, discreetly talk with that student about, is there somebody that they get on well with on the course? Are there friends that they would benefit from working with? Clear defined tasks, deadlines and outcomes. I think we all benefit from those. Communications, as I say, I think it's the use of social media and being conscious that students may well decide that that's a facility they're going to use anyway. Support, supervision and accountability, and conflict resolution. As I said at the beginning, there's often a lot around, if there's an issue, then the autistic person's got to change, when actually most of the time I'm asked to pulled into this, the autistic person is the one being bullied. So it's about staff having that confidence to look at conflict resolution. And although all the members of the group might be reporting what the autistic student, actually, is it really the autistic student who's the one with the issue? Staff training and support for all staff, not just academic staff, but administrative staff, clerical staff, anybody that comes into contact with that student. And that's staff's training in disability confidence and autism understanding. Student training, as I mentioned before, I think that's useful as well, having some general training for students to understand their neurodiverse peers. Consultation and feedback from autistic students. I think Frederick talked about this in his presentation. Actually, we need to be asking students what is it they want, and that's what I was trying to do with my research, really, going back in and capturing that student voice. And advertising your good practice. As I've said before, they do a lot of things right, but they don't always tell students what they're doing. So being more upfront about that. Now, to me, the majority of this was common sense. I didn't think I found anything particularly groundbreaking. And I talked this through with a colleague. She made the excellent point that it might well be common sense, but it's not yet common practice. You know, that there are still issues for autistic students, and there are very simple changes that can be made, but they need to be pointed out to faculty staff. So to just round off then, thinking about what the conference was about taking responsibility in universal design for learning, that's where my project ended up, really. If you embed inclusive practice, you reduce the need for reactive individual adjustments. You achieve genuine inclusivity. You take responsibility for all learners by anticipating their needs. And I kind of came to the conclusion that there was a lot that's put in place that makes life difficult for an autistic student that disadvantages those students with autism. But really, of all the things that I came up with, if they were put in place as part of Universal Design for Learning, they would not disadvantage neurotypical students. But there's a lot you can put in place that disadvantages autistic students. And I think the Institute of Physics sum it up best when they say, good practice benefits all, but bad practice adversely affects disadvantaged groups. And that really resonated with me when I saw that. So the next steps then, some internal and external dissemination. So I presented this to the physics department, to an internal teaching and learning conference, to the national conference in England, and then this afternoon internationally, which has been great. I've also written a paper for the Ahead Journal. So if this piques your interest, the paper has been accepted. So I think that will be in the next edition of the journal online in a few months' time. I'm looking at other areas we could develop. There's been some really good work from the University of Leeds about assessment. And I'm going to continue developing opportunities for autistic students to have a voice. I've just started an education doctorate myself. If anybody has some burning issues that you think need researching for autistic learners, please, by all means, feel free to get in touch with me. And I can be contacted at my email address at the end there.
Thank you so much.
Have I hit the time there?
Oh my God, spot on, spot on. Wow, you have been using a timer.
I did time it, yeah.
Listen, that was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Sharron. It's really interesting, I suppose, looking at those findings and just thinking about them in the context of that research now. And, you know, as we look for what's going to happen in September, what's going to happen in the medium term in terms of practice. It's really, really interesting to look at those small groups and I suppose that lab practice. How is that going to work?
Yeah, I really don't know how they'll do that, especially in, you know, the science courses like physics and chemistry. I mean, my own university has already started planning for the idea that we won't be back on campus, or students won't be on campus till January. That's their worst case scenario. And I know psychology have started developing alternatives to their lab modules, but that's very much around data handling. So that can go online. Yes. But how physics and chemistry will do it, I don't know. And they have to achieve a certain amount of practical lab work to have the accredited degree. But when they do the lab work, they are aware they've got a lot of students in small labs that are really probably not fit for purpose, and it's the autistic students who struggle most in that situation. Yeah. So yes, it will be interesting to see what they're forced into doing, because I think I'm sure everybody's finding that faculty are being forced to think in a way that as disability practitioners, we've wanted them to look at for a long time, you know, alternative ways of doing assessment, alternative ways of putting material online and things like that. And now they're having to do that. I'm hoping that will kickstart another conversation about universal design for learning and how we can use the resources we've got available to us.
Yeah, well, you've got some absolutely fantastic principles there, and what we can do is we can go along and put that link in the document for additional resources for participants if they want to read it, if that's okay with yourself, Sharron.
Yeah, by all means. I think I did email you the PDF of it, because I've got a Word version as well, if that's easy if people using screen readers. So I can send those to you again. Yeah, by all means, please do put it up.
Perfect. Have we got any burning questions? I think there was a couple of people that had fantastic comments throughout the session. It would be great to hear if anybody has any key questions. Trevor, is there anything there?
Yeah, well, Frederick Frovey said something interesting about common sense but not common practice. So I think that was kind of good in terms of like some of the things that you're saying in your presentations. For those who are aware of those kind of students that Sharron is talking about, might seem kind of common sense, but there's always that kind of new audience who need to be just reminded of that as well. And the other thing is, like, now is a good time to reflect on those kind of students and really kind of think, like, when they do come back, you know, how can we, you know, consider how we teach and bring them back into the campus? Because I mean, it's going to be a big change to their routine again, kind of coming back. And
it's funny the amount of my students who've said they're enjoying lockdown, because that actually goes quite well with the way that they live their day-to-day lives. You know, a lot of them have an online life. They like learning at a distance. They like not having to have too much social interaction. So you're right. I think how we're going to transition them back onto busy campuses will be quite interesting, quite a challenge, I think.
Yeah. And actually, there's two questions that have come in. Maria Reardon said, is there any documentation of current conditions for autistic students in HE and FE? Or is there any documenting of current conditions? I'm not sure. Maybe she means that just in terms of numbers in HE and FE altogether, the numbers of students altogether with autism?
I mean, I know certainly in the UK, we have the HESA statistics that are online. At my own university, I've got about 100 students. I mean, they say that 1 in 100 people are on the autistic spectrum. We have a student population of about 20,000. So I should expect to have 200 students, and I know of 100. And of those, about 70 are accessing support to any degree. So I think although the numbers of autistic students have gone up quite a lot in the last few years, I think there's quite a lot of students we've not yet reached who haven't shared their diagnosis with us for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they're doing fine, and actually there's more inclusive practice out there than I give faculty credit for. But yeah.
If I can just jump in as well here, sorry. Yeah. I know from Maria's query for ourselves, we in AHEAD actually cover, that every year we have the participation rates report, which is that we look at the number of students with disabilities studying in higher education, in further education. And I know that the ETBs are also looking to capture that, and they've made, I think last year, publicly available the number of different students with different disabilities available, or learners with different disabilities available. So I do think, you know, knowing the information is part of raising the awareness, and I suppose making people more prepared for what's to come. But that's one area, and you can look at Maria, if you want to look at the AHEAD website, we have all of the statistics every year for HE anyway, and for FE you can just, I think Sulis has the statistics there.
I'll also share with you the list of best practice guidance I reviewed, because it goes all the way back to 2000, but actually if you read the documents it's still relevant now, and it covers general disabilities as well as autism. So I'll send that to you, because all of that guidance is available online. So if people want to look at some best practice guidance, some ideas that are already out there, might be useful for them, because a lot of the guidance didn't just cover group work, it covers supporting disabled students or students with disabilities in all areas of learning.
Okay, and just one question left from Chloe Cox, just about how can we support students with autism who are now online? So you've kind of answered-ish some of that questions.
I think you'll find you probably have to support them less than you do when they're face to face. A lot of them are they're quite happy online. They're quite competent. Yeah. I've found them engaging. I think it's the same for all students. I think whatever online platform you're using, there just needs to be clear directives of how to use that, where to find the information, and also, and this is written into the guidance, who to turn to if something's going wrong. So whether that's your tutor in a group work project, your disability advisor, if your tech's not working, whatever it is, I think as long as those students know who to turn to if things are not working out the way it should, I think that's the best way you can support them, whether they're on campus or online anyway.